Hi, this is Alex, and I have a video today about an amazing dream I had last night. It was actually sort of a vision kind of just before I was drifting off to sleep last night, and it has a lot to do with this reality and why we came here, and it's super fascinating. It really gave me a realization, so I can't wait to share it with you guys. Before I do, if you're interested in any topics in growth, self-help, healing, enlightenment, psychology, and all kinds of things like that, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, all that good stuff. So anyway, let me tell you guys about this. So essentially what I was asking is, I think I just posed a question to myself, which is always a good thing to do. Simply pose a question to yourself and then go totally emotionally neutral and just let something come in. And what I was asking about really was the nature of why I came to this reality, right? Just a tiny little question there, nothing too big. And what I got about why or how I got here and came here and why it's been so frustrating and all that kind of stuff, because we're always curious to know these things, is I saw myself kind of riding over what looked to be sort of a deserty region, I would say. Kind of just a landscape, and I'm kind of traveling over this landscape somehow, and this indicated the course of kind of being alive here, I think, or dipping into this reality in the first place. But then what I realized was happening is I was dividing into two, and this would naturally happen. So I saw myself, and this happened very quickly in the vision, but I was able to kind of observe it, which is always the best practice. And then a few minutes later, I came back and I was able to see what was going on. And so what was happening is I was just kind of drifting through this reality, and I was splitting into kind of two all the time, where I would almost dissociate from the experience. And what I think this meant was I would be trying to come down into this very dense vibration of Earth, but then another part of me kept trying to pop out and be higher dimensional, in the sense of, okay, I want to create this other reality over here. I want to fantasize my way out of it. I want to imagine that I can fly all of a sudden and jump into the air and do all these really cool things. Or I can manifest like instantly. And all of that sounds super wonderful. But remember, if we're coming from lighter, kind of higher, less dense vibrations of reality, which I think we are in general, and then we're dropping into here at some point, eons of time ago, or whenever you want to think about that, it has the effect of coming into a place that's very limiting and inhibiting. And in fact, that's why we're here. We want to learn through that experience, I think, but it still feels very constraining. So in the beginning, though, it's like you've decided to come down here, but a part of you is like, no, I want to keep playing up in the clouds and in the sky and in fifth dimension, sixth dimension, whatever. I want to keep kind of acting like that's my experience. So you're not actually glued into this reality yet. So I saw myself as kind of going along like that. And that kind of kept happening. And the next thing that happened is there was like a self-correction. And I think I, or my higher self, was like, you know what, that's not working. Because we keep trying to kind of like get out of here, and kind of like a child playing. It's like the child wants to kind of do one thing, but then 2 seconds later they get distracted and they want to play another game. It was kind of like that, right? But then my higher self comes in and it's like, okay, yeah, we need to go back to the drawing board, and we need a way to glue into this reality more. Because if we keep doing this, we're never going to actually have this experience. It's like we can't really decide if we want to be here or whether we want to go play with the fairies. And so then pain comes in. And essentially I saw this sense of kind of like, as I said, it was like going along a landscape, but then I was like driving into the ground almost, like over and over again. I was like kind of falling downwards and kind of like tripping along and kind of falling down. And where this ultimately went, this sense of like being driven into the ground, is I saw these, I think they were, interestingly, it was like 4 horsemen, not to make this all apocalyptic, like 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but I saw these like knights or soldiers on horseback kind of riding along. And I think there were 4 of them. And then all of a sudden they're holding their lances or their spears out, and they start kind of like poking at me. And then at this point, my journey for me was manifested in this vision as me holding on to like a small bird that looked very colorful, like a tropical bird. And it did look like a real live creature, but it also had this kind of cartoonish quality. So I'm holding on to this like tropical bird that to me represented that sense of magic and joy. So now, instead of getting all distracted constantly and splitting my conscious experience into like floating into fantasies, instead now I have this embodied as like a bird that I'm holding in my arms, like cradling. And this bird is my link to the other realms. And these horsemen keep they're pursuing me, and then eventually they sort of drive me and chase me down, and then I end up lying on the ground kind of in the fetal position, and my eyes are closed, and I'm holding on to this bird, and this bird represents again that link to sort of magic and joy and inspiration and fantasy and higher dimensions, you could say. And then these horsemen are like poking me with their spears and like basically causing pain and suffering. And I'm just there kind of like with my eyes closed, almost going into REM sleep, like I'm still kind of in a fantasy, but at this point it's much less, it's not as fully dissociated, and it's not to the point where I'm actually like perceiving multiple realities like I was before, but instead I'm just kind of down there in the dirt, like lying in the fetal position, and then like internally I'm like having a perception of an internal escapism or an internal fantasy, I guess, to sort of avoid this suffering, as I'm being basically like speared to, I don't know if it's like, not like speared to death, but I'm being like poked over and over again, and all this pain is shooting into my body. And then this little bird is that sense of joy that's kind of like looking around curiously. And that was essentially what I saw. And it might seem kind of brief, and you might be a little bit lost as to what this is, but to me I was like, oh, I get it. And let me explain what was going on here, and I'm going to explain how this, I really think, can apply to just about everybody. Because this is really about pain and suffering, and it's about coming into a very dense and very difficult reality and what pain and suffering does. If you're coming here from the higher realms and you want to really experience this reality, you need a way to ground and glue into it to make it compelling enough and to pull you in. And unfortunately, that's where pain comes in. Because if something is very pleasant and easy, we don't necessarily commit to it. And you can think about your daily lives and the lives of over the whole course of your whole life. When something is easy, when something doesn't have a whole lot of friction, how do you tend to respond to it? You know, do you throw yourself into it fully, or is it like, yeah, I'll experience it halfway and then I'll think about something else? You know, I don't think I need to answer that question. So pain has the effect of gluing us into this reality, because obviously it's hooking directly into our bodies, and what physical sensation and the nervous system are so huge here that pain is like essentially a way to take over the whole state of consciousness, because it's like all of a sudden your focus is completely drawn to pain and suffering and all these very primal, if you want to say, reptilian brain aspects of life, right? Like pain, suffering, anguish. So what we do is we get honed in very like a drill bit, like directly into this world. And it's like, oh, I really am here. It totally focuses our perception on being here and now on Earth. And so, I mean, that is essentially the goal here, to kind of like really tap us in so we stop drifting quite so much, and we'd say, oh, I really am in this dense frequency now. And then we can actually start this difficult but rewarding exploration of life on Earth. But what tends to happen after that point? And at this point in the dream, it would be this idea of getting chased by the horsemen, this sense of like pain is going to be inflicted on me because I'm being pursued, and because there's this risk of threat to me in my physical body. But then once we keep going with that, what's the normal human reaction to pain? Right? Because pain was there in order to glue us into this reality and to focus our perception. But what happens when we get enough pain? Then again, we look for a way out. Because when something gets really painful, that's when the escapism comes in, that's when the fantasies come in, that's when the substances, the substance abuse comes in, the maladaptive daydreaming, which is basically when you're constantly, it's a soft form of a dissociation where you're daydreaming, thinking about fantasy. It could be it could be Harry Potter or Marvel comics, or it could be fantasies you're inventing in your own head, or it could be daydreaming about people in your daily life. Whatever it is, it's just kind of like I'm sort of in the here and now, but I'm also kind of staring out the window and looking at the clouds. And oops, before I knew it, an hour went by and I was literally just wrapped up in my own thoughts. It's considered kind of unhealthy to do this. I mean, there's so many forms of kind of escapism, and just even when you become in denial about your own life, that's escapism. Like, my life sucks, but I want to pretend it's amazing. I have really bad relationships and I don't know how to have healthy relationships in my life, but I'm just going to act like things are fine, or that it's expected that I have bad relationships, so I never try to improve them. And all these sort of lies we tell ourselves, right? It's all a response to pain and trauma, because it's so difficult to go through that. So the pain and trauma that we used in order to glue us into this reality then becomes the pain and trauma that can actually cause further ungluing and dissociation from this reality. So when I ended up on the dirt in the fetal position and I'm basically being speared, I mean, these horsemen, if you want to look at it, are basically working for me. It's like I set this up, like I invited this experience from a very top-down level of like, yeah, we need pain and suffering in order to create a gelling with this level of creation so I can actually commit to being here. But then that pain and suffering causes this sense of like, I'm just going to close my eyes in the fetal position and pop out of it and think I'm somewhere else. And I think holding this tropical, beautiful bird in a way, a bird is all about freedom and flying away. And it's such a symbol of, especially this very colorful bird that I perceived as having lots of blue and indigo and these lovely colors. It was this sense of this bird as being able to theoretically fly away, but I'm holding it and clutching it close to me. Now the bird himself, or I guess it could be herself, the bird was actually more okay with the experience than I was, the way I perceived this. Like, the bird was just kind of chilling in my arms, and the bird was not being targeted whatsoever. So this sense of joy and magic and the true and genuine connection to higher realms was totally intact. That bird could theoretically go and fly away and kind of explore the terrain here and then come back to me. Like, that bird could be the part of me that wants to see this reality and fly and glide above it and experience it and see all the joy and the beauty in this world, in this vibration of Earth. But I'm kind of holding it close to me, so the bird is sort of there in my arms, and meanwhile I'm getting speared and stabbed by these guys on horseback in order to create the pain. I'm not participating fully in that experience yet because it's too painful, and I'm not either accepting what the bird is offering quite, which is the ability to kind of float above the pain in this reality while still seeing this reality and being immersed in it. So it's kind of like a middle way, perhaps. I mean, this is how I'm interpreting it right now, of being able to see joy, but also to stay actually here without having to totally dissociate into another dimension and to almost craft my own parallel timeline as a result of not even wanting to be here. If that sounds familiar to anyone at all. So yeah, that's the experience. And so you can see here that it's about pain is having this dual-sided thing. Pain is so powerful in getting us to commit to a reality, but then pain becomes the thing that makes us want to leave the reality. And I think that in itself is its own balancing act, because we've got to learn to see pain. I hate to even say this, but you start to see pain as a gift. And you see suffering as a tool, and it actually literally serves a purpose. Then on the back end of that, when it hurts so much that you don't want to be here anymore, you're still dealing with those bumps. It's like an airplane when it's landing on the runway. The airplane lands once, but then it bumps up once or twice because the wings are still creating enough lift. So the airplane lands, the landing gear hits the runway, but then bump, bump, and then finally it's smooth and stable. Now that process of bump, bump, bump on the runway, that could be 5,000 lifetimes. No, I don't know how long. It could be a long ass time. So it's not necessarily just 5 seconds, but I'm saying that in the greater scheme of things, it's just acclimating to being here. And of course, the paradox of all of this is when you've truly acclimated to being on Earth, you've truly come to terms with what this place is, and you're able to accept the pain, breathe and sit through the pain and trauma without running away and without escaping. As soon as you can truly do that, you've just about manifested your way out of here. Isn't that crazy? So that's something to think about. I hope this was interesting to you. And again, think about liking and subscribing for more cool videos where I keep delving into these topics. All right, have a great day.